And we're live in 3, 2, 1. And welcome, everybody. It's Rob Mullins here with yet another Planetmullins Podcast. Da, 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 da. And today I've got a good buddy of mine, actually, a good friend and an amazingly accomplished studio producer and composer, educator, world traveler, and a guy with a great sense of humor, which I always love in a guest. And you'll see that as we go through. It's Mr. Jim Linahon from LMP Studios. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Rob, how you doing? It's good to see you.
Yeah,
Long time no sees. We've been busy.
Yeah, I know. And then we got hit with this whole COVID thing. But that brings me to my sponsor, because if you're stuck in your house and you can't go anywhere and you're just thinking to yourself, how am I going to pass all these hours? Why not get a brand new piano from Pierre's Fine Pianos at 11039 West Pico and West LA. He's got Fazioli as the exclusive top line, and Herbie Hancock's Fazioli is on the stage there. He does little concerts. They have a shop. They rebuild Steinways. They sell Kawhi and Mason and Hamlin. I always call those Marvin and Hamlish.
Yeah.
You know,
Marvin Hamlish influence, yeah.
Right, but check out the website. He's got pictures of everything. It's by appointment only because of the COVID thing, but you can talk to Pierre or Win at www.pierresfinepianos.com. Okay, so Jim, holy crap, I'm looking at your bio and it says Tony Bennett. Now, you're obviously a producer, engineer, trumpet player. You do a lot of stuff, but you've worked with, and this is like a short list, Tony Bennett, Frank Sinatra, Arsenio Hall, Barry Manilow, Johnny Carson, Merv Griffin, Sammy Davis Jr., Ella Fitzgerald, Henry Mancini, Sarah Vaughn, Beverly Sills, Warner Brothers, Walt Disney, Sony, ABC, NBC, CBS, KGB. No, I made that up.
Yeah. Not knowingly anyway. Yeah.
CNN, A&E. You've done music with Angelina Jolie's films. You're part of the Emmys. You're part of the Grammys. You're part of the Golden Globes. And I really want to talk about this thing here, about the thing that you did for the King of Thailand's inaugural.
Sure, that was
fun. Because I know a secret about the King of Thailand that probably you and I and only 5 other people in all the world know.
Right. Well, my involvement with that, it was called the Saoe Festival, which was the Southeast Asia Wind and Orchestra Youth Ensemble Festival. And the King, our very dear mutual friend, Gene Aiken, started teaching. He retired from UNC and was immediately hired at Mahidol University in Bangkok to help develop a world music program and a jazz program and a publishing for composers program, all based right there in Bangkok. So for the first 3 years, he worked at that university, and he, Gene, he's always got something wonderful to create.
Right.
And he convinced the administration, who then took it to the King, who absolutely officially sponsored the festival, that's a big deal in Thailand, as we both know. When the King says this is good, everybody's on board.
Right.
And so I think they had 20 groups from all over Asia, from Singapore, from China, from Japan, from Malaysia, from Taipei, from Taiwan. I think the Philippines. I think they were all represented. Everybody sent, and some were wind ensembles, some were jazz groups, some were chamber music, some were string orchestras, and it was a big. I think it went on for a couple of weeks, and so in the hall that they were performing in, the big hall, which I think Gene said it was about 1,300 or 1,400. They recorded every single.
Wow.
And so then he called me up and he said, can I bring all of this to you, and can we go through this and, and find the best pieces and all the best stuff. Wow. And that was before I had opened LMP Studios. So we were down at Westlake Studios on Beverly, the Michael Jackson.
Yeah, in Hollywood, yeah.
Yeah, in Hollywood, down at Westlake. And so we were down at Westlake, and I think we were in C most of the time, but we were there for a considerable period of time. We were there for probably 10 days, and we worked our way through it. And so that was the involvement with that. And then I think I did 2 more albums for them. And it was wonderful music. Man, some of it was brilliant live playing by young players from the ages of 14 up to about 20. The orchestras from Singapore were amazing. Boy, they were.
Wow.
And the Japanese, of course, were exceptional, tremendous.
Well, sure.
They were way, way advanced.
Well, I ended up going through Thailand on my way to Vietnam to do a really weird gig because I had taken a gig on New Year's Eve in communist North Vietnam during a trade embargo for 1994. And this is what's so weird about international travel, because, you know, I had Wilton Felder in the band from the Crusaders. He said, hell no, I ain't going. No, and I had Ndugu. He said, Mullins, you're on your own.
Right.
And I couldn't get anyone in my band to say,
yes.
Oh yeah, I'll go into Vietnam through Bangkok embassy.
Yeah, understandably.
Right, but you know, I'll do anything for some press.
Yeah.
And, so I get on the plane and I'm flying Thai Airways, and
which are great airways, by the way.
It's a great airline. And then I'm listening to the music, I'm flipping through the radio and stuff, and it's a super limited amount of music that you can get. It's all old school big band trombone music. And then, you know, finally I asked one of the stewardesses, I said, you know, I really don't understand why this trombone thing is this like ever present everywhere. And she says, well, the king of Thailand is a big band trombone player.
Yeah.
This is the only music he allows on the flight.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Actually, he was a saxophone player. He was an alto sax player. But his brother played trombone.
Oh, his brother was a trombone.
And he loved trombones. He loved saxophones, and you know, he loved everything. This guy really was a jazz aficionado. But his brother was a trombone thing, and I think his brother was in charge of the Thai Airlines at the time.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So he would pick the program.
You get all that nepotistic stuff going on. You might think you're even working at a college.
Yeah. Well, we won't go there. We've been there before. There's a little bit of that. Of course, you know, I mean, none of that happens in the film industry or the music industry.
Oh, well, yeah, you make a really good point there. But, you know, when I look at this list of names, you know, it's such an unusually diverse group of names. I was interviewing this Preston Glass, who was the guy who discovered Kenny G, and I mean, it's Whitney and it's all these things. And you know, then he just piped up and he says, I was just a kid and somebody called me to produce Johnny Mathis.
Yeah, right.
And I was like, holy crap, Johnny Mathis. Right. But I mean, maybe we could talk about some of these epic sessions. I mean,
you know, when you said nepotism, it brought something to mind because it was a classic quote. There was a very famous film composer in Hollywood named John Cockavis.
Okay.
And John originally, he's a really interesting guy. He grew up in South Dakota, and his family had, he and his wife Bonnie, both families had restaurants in this little town. I'm not sure if it was Fargo or which town it was. I don't remember.
Okay.
And then John was in the war, writing and arranging. And then after the war, he came home and he told his dad, you know, he said, I really want to stay in this music business. He said, well, can you make any money in it? And who makes the money? And he said, well, it appears that the people that write the music make the most money. And he said, well, then that's where you have to focus. So he and his wife moved to London right after the war. Like, I think it was 1946, 47. And Bonnie, if you hear this and I'm wrong, I apologize because I'm just kind of trying to remember. But they went, and for a while, it was impossible for him to get work, you know, because it was post-war and he was trying to get into chapel music, which was based in London, and they weren't having any of it. And so he was writing high school band, marching band, and little concert overtures and publishing through Barnhouse Publishing in Iowa, in Oskaloosa, Iowa.
Wow.
And I said, John, were you able to make enough money? He lived in Beverly Hills. He lives in Harpo Marx's old house,
wow.
which is a whole trip unto itself, right?
Right.
So John said, well, he said, I didn't make much money. He said, so I applied my other skills. And I said, well, what did you do, John? He said, well, he said, I'd put on a tuxedo every night and I'd go down to Harrods and I would gamble. And he said, I was basically a professional gambler. 5 nights a week. And he said, I made pretty good money and fed my family for 3 years while still writing and meeting people in the industry and all this and that. Eventually, Chappell did hire him, and they liked him so much that in 1953, they offered him the job of Chappell Music Director of Operations in New York.
Wow, big time.
Yeah, and
That's
when he went there, the story was, and he told this many times, he went there, he thought he had like, I mean, Ira Gershwin was still alive, right? Ira Gershwin and Cole Porter and Jerome Kern and mental moment here, but all of these
all those cats.
All the cats, they were all there. And so he decided that in order to meet everybody, he would have a happy hour on Friday afternoon at 3:00, right?
Good call.
Yeah, exactly. And so he put the word out to everybody, hey, 3:00, Chappell Music, good food, some nice cocktails, come and hang out for 2 hours. So he puts the word out to everybody, calls everybody, invites them, like 40 of the top people in the world,
Wow.
And at 3:00, nobody. 3:15, knock on the door, opens the door, in walks Irving Berlin, the name I was searching for.
Oh,
Irving Berlin walks in, he goes, where is everybody? And John said, well, they're going to be here shortly. And he said, can I make you a drink? And John made the best martinis in the world. They're the secret martinis, right? And so Irving Berlin looked right at him. He says, do you want to make a martini? And John says, as a matter of fact, I think I make one of the best martinis in the world. And he goes, I'll be the judge of that. So they pull out all the hors d'oeuvres and the caviar, the whole 9 yards. And he makes Irving the first drink. And Irving goes, toasted it, said, I'll have another. He stayed for 2 hours, drank 5 martinis, stood up, no impact at all, and said, are we doing this again next Friday? And he said, absolutely. The next Friday, there were 40 composers at Chappell Music, and they all went there for a long, long time. And while he was at Chappell, that's when he met Telly Savalas, who was an actor in New York at the time.
Okay.
So when Telly came out and got situated in Hollywood, and he did the Dirty Dozen and all that stuff. Then John came out and started doing, movies intermittently, and then he got the Kojak TV show. Well, then
I remember Kojak was huge.
Open. And one of the things when you were talking about nepotism, John used to talk about this. He said, he said, we went in one day and he said, this guy just walked up and said, this is my second cousin, and he's a trumpet player. And the producer, Jack Elliott, or whoever, Jack Johnson, whoever it was, said, he's playing third trumpet today. And John just looked at this guy like, what? And he said, oh, okay. So he went over to Telly, on the set. And he said, do I have a new third trumpet player? And he just looked at him and he said, it's a family business. He's a family member. He's playing third trumpet. Got it. No problem. And I went and I said, could he play? And he says, the guy said he wasn't too bad. And so he just played third trumpet for 3 or 4 years. And it was like, cool, and they had great trumpet players, great musicians on that orchestra of John's.
Oh, yeah. Well,
John was a fun cat to work with. I loved him. He was a great man.
It makes you crazy. I mean, for me, coming from Denver, because I grew up in LA, then I was in Denver for a while, then I had this big album and I go back to LA. So I had the mistaken impression that good music had something to do with the music business. And I didn't realize. I showed up there and I thought, well, I mean, I got this hit album. Everybody's going to want to work with me. Oh, no.
The business is the business and the art is the art, and we all get excited about the art, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to make any money with it,
That's true. So, well, I mean, I've interviewed several studio people and everybody pretty much has a really great, like their best session story and then the worst session story.
Sure.
And my worst, I love the worst ones because there's so many of them.
Oh dear God!
And I'll just tell, man, maybe while I'm telling this one, you can think of one that you'd want to share with our viewers. But this was about 1.5 years ago. I'm at Carmen Grillo's place in Encino, and it was a semi-pro or amateur singer coming in to do his demo.
Sure.
And he was like a Frank Sinatra type dude. So he comes in, I had done all the charts, everything was groovy. We had the band, we record all the stuff. Then he, overdubs his vocals, and then we mix it and we send it off to him. So I get this call a couple hours after he gets the email, and he's calling me the worst producer in the history of the business, and my engineer doesn't know his bleep from a hole in the ground, and we've destroyed his project. Yeah, you don't know what I mean. And I'm thinking, I called Carmen. I said, Carmen, I got an email from the client. He said, what's wrong? We did great, but we always, and you're probably this way too, like we'd rather have a happy client eventually at the end.
Sure, of course.
Rather than have peace and bad blood.
It's their person, it's their soul, and even if they aren't the best in the world, we give them the very best we can. That's our industry.
Right. So Jim, this is so funny. So I call and I say, Carmen, I got to come over and hear it. He says, okay. We get there, pull up the first track, and the guy, he thought we messed up his vocal. That's what he said. So I said, solo that vocal on Fly Me to the Moon. And he solos it and he goes, fly me to the moon and let me play among the stars. Let me see what life is like on Jupiter and Mars. And I was like, oh, shit. The guy can't.
Oh, no.
So anyway, I call the guy and I say, look, man, you just swallow all the S's. Yeah, like there's,
there, right? Yeah.
It was an addiction thing. So Carmen goes through the entire session and finds all the S syllables.
Sure.
And he's tacking them on like surgically.
Sure.
One at a time.
Yeah, and you could go out and go to the Mars, and you just put the on there, and it's you're good to go. He doesn't even need to be the original singer, right? Or they'll have something with a P in it where it's supposed to be like Republic, right? And they'll go Republic, and you don't have the P sound. You go out and go, and then you put the with Pro Tools now, it's very easy to do. With analog, it was a lot harder, obviously.
It was a lot harder. Well, does any session come to mind that was just like one of the worst?
Well, there's so many of them. There were so many of them that were funny, and there were a couple. One was a movie that we were doing for a movie of the week, and it was actually John Cockavis's orchestra. And it was I and Rick Baptist and Warren Looning was playing first trumpet. Warren always played first trumpet for John because he just loved him. He had such a beautiful sound, and he was such a brilliant jazz player. And so it was Warren on first and Rick on second, and I was on third. And John said, would you like to do this? It'd be fun. And it was a movie about I can't remember her first name, Burke. She was a female photographer in the 30s, very famous, did a lot of wonderful things, and was way ahead of her time as far as a woman photographer during the Great Depression.
Okay.
Bork, I think it was Bork or Burke. I can't remember. At any rate, they'd had a lot of money involved. It was about $1.2 million, $1.3 million, and that was a lot of money in the 1980s for a television show. For a single movie of the week, ABC 90-minute special. 90-minute. Remember the movie of the week thing on ABC?
Yeah.
And so the orchestra's playing, the charts are great, everything's going good. And John came up to me before, and I wasn't sure why. And he came in and he said, you have booth privileges. I said, I do? And he said, yeah. He said, I'm always happy to have an extra set of ears in the booth. And I'm thinking, why? There's a competent studio. Yeah, I think it was Burbank and some one of the studios, a good studio. And it was like, and when your friend asks you say, I said, okay, John, well, sure, I'll be happy to come in. And so I walked in and he said, Jim, this is the producer. I don't remember the gentleman's name actually. And he said, well, just stand in the corner and don't get in the way. And I said, no problem.
Okay.
Right away, the vibe was like, ouch, right?
Right.
And they're doing great work, man. They're mixing on the fly. It's TV. Oh. And there was a second engineer there. And you could just feel this thing getting hotter and hotter and more tense. And because this was the guy that had all the money on the line, right? And finally, the little assistant second engineer, probably third engineer, I think there were 3 engineers, it was the third, who basically was just keeping scribe, right? He was just making sure where on the analog tapes, 2 minutes and 41 seconds is cue number 14, right?
Right.
And so I don't remember what the guy said, but he he turned around and he said, what blah, 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 what is that? He says, let's see, Q14 or Q14 is at 12 minutes and 46 seconds, sir. And he goes, and the guy says, are you sure? And he goes, look, man, I'm sure. And he goes, what did you say to me? And he just launched. It was just a nuclear meltdown for like 2 minutes of screaming. And then when he was vented, then he just collapsed back in the chair. And John turned around and said, Jim, it's really lovely to have you here. And completely changed the vibe. And I chatted with him about what wonderful the music was and how good the film looked. For 2 minutes. It was, therapy, right?
Wow.
And then I understood why I got booth privileges. The other one, and you'll relate to this because this is kind of what you were talking about. I had a really good, very good singer come from Japan. And for a Japanese singer, he really didn't have much of an accent, very, very little. You could almost not tell that he was a Japanese singer, which is, not common. Most of them will have that accent, which is totally natural.
Right, natural.
And he was a pretty good jazz pianist. So I said, well, look, he wanted to build a whole orchestra. And I said, if I put a whole orchestra in there, then you've got to sing all this stuff live. And I said, if we do the rhythm section, then you can put your vocals on until we're comfortable with them. Right. Even if they're just scratch vocals, then we can put in all the strings and the horns and the French horns and the woodwinds and all that stuff and build a 40-piece orchestra around you. Then we can come back and have you do pristine vocals. And that way it keeps the pressure off of you. And he said, okay, great. Well, so the rhythm section was, oh gosh, I think it was Greg Fields on drums. It was Tom Rainier on piano, Adrian Rosen on bass, and I don't know.
Well,
one of the great guitarists, right? Frank Potenza, one of those wonderful players. And so, but what I didn't plan for, and I put him in an ISO booth, is that he was so nervous that those guys were there because he knew every one of them. His eyes just got huge.
Right, because they're all studio legends.
Yeah, and it just didn't dawn on me. And he could sing fine. And he went out there and he could not find relative pitch for the entire night.
Wow.
And Adrian Rosen came in and he goes, Jim, is it okay if we just turn the vocals off on our headphones? I said, absolutely. It's not a problem. Because, and then afterwards, he was like, I had to talk to him for about a half an hour. Then everybody left. And then he went out and sang fantastically. It was just how nervous he was because he cared so deeply, and that those guys were they were like superstars, and
sure.
But so and the album came out great. It did very, very well. He was quite a famous singer in Japan, and I really enjoyed him. He was a great, great human being. But it just kind of shows you how even when you first play with somebody that's really like your hero or somebody that's it's so intimidating that you can play really bad. Yeah.
It's real easy to get starstruck. Well,
yes, it sure is.
Was it, on your list here, who was it, was there anyone? Obviously, Tony Bennett and Frank Sinatra. Oh my God.
Yeah, those were days I cherish those days, those were.
Were you living in Vegas or how did they find out?
When I moved here to California, I did a couple of dates and Bill Miller was on them. And Bill came up and said, you play very nice trumpet and where do you live? And I said, well, I'm living in Rancho Cucamonga, which was Alta Loma at the time. And he said, well, we have a lot of work in Palm Springs for various artists. Would you like to come out and play some of the shows? I said, absolutely. Well, then I met Ken Leesite, who was the other trumpet player who was in Palm Springs. It was quite a good trumpet player. And then, I can't think of the guy that owned the local music store, great guy. I'll think of his name here in a second. Okay. I got to know them. And so I just kind of became part of that thing. And then, so Bill called me and I did a couple of things. And then, do you know Pat Rizzo? Have you ever known Pat? He was a saxophone player. He used to play with Sly and the Family Stone. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And Pat's a great musician, phenomenal musician.
Sure.
And of course, Jilly Rizzo was his father. And Jilly was a wonderful guy, as is Pat. And Jilly had I think it was Delmonico's at the time, a restaurant in town.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah. And so Pat was always fronting bands all the time. And all of a sudden, you know, it was like, well, we're going to do a Sinatra thing. And it was I and Ollie Mitchell and Ray Triscari and Ken Leesite. And I think there was one other trumpet player whose name, I'm sorry, I can't remember. But anyway, it was really a fun gig. And that kind of started it. So you get in the rotation of that band.
Oh.
And so then, you know, we did some things. And whenever, you know, they usually kept a pool of about 9 or 10 players in each, like the trumpet players, trombone players. They had their favorites. Uh-huh. And whenever somebody wasn't available, then I slowly worked my way up the list to where I got to play with them a lot of times. It was really fun.
Wow.
I love that. That was a golden period. I never in my life dreamed. One night I actually had a picture of this. I can't find it. I'm very distressed about it, but we were doing, Barbara Sinatra had a foundation, right? And okay. Frank would do these giant fundraisers at the Spa Hotel. So there'd be like 1,500 people, you know, 10 people at a table, $30,000 a table, right?
Wow.
And they would raise massive amounts of money. Annenberg did the same thing. We played a lot with Sammy Davis for the Annenberg family, which raised a lot of money for Jewish charities. Okay. And but for the Barbara Sinatra Foundation, so as is always the case, it's, you know, 6:30, the band starts to play rhythm section stuff. At 7 o'clock, 6:45, 15 minutes, a small group, the band would play dance music and they'd have a little dance floor in the front. People would come down and dance, and it was all swing era stuff for the most part.
Right.
And so on those, I would play fourth because I had to be fresh for the show, you know, because I never knew what they were going to, you know, and most time the guys never had me play first. I didn't have to, but occasionally it would be, Jim, I'm tired, play this, you know, and you had to make sure you were 100%. So I would play fourth, which always was the fun trumpet part on the swing bands anyway, right? Because they had all the cool solos, Sir Beer Bin and Sugar Lips and all that kind of shit.
Oh, wow. The solo chair is the fourth.
Yeah, so you could stand up and play, you know, ba-da-da-dee, da-da-da-da-da-da-dee, you know, one of those things, right? And so we did, I don't remember what the tune was, but anyway, I had a trumpet solo and I stood up and played. And I sat back down and we finished the tune and we were on a riser, like on the third riser up, right at the back of the orchestra. And somebody tapped me on the foot because I was right on the end of the section. And I looked down and it was Frank. And he looked up and he said, nice solo. And I said, thank you, Mr. Sinatra. Wow. And then he turned around and started to talk again. And it was Frank Sinatra, Lucille Ball, Carlo Montalban, Bob Hope, and Red Skelton. There were the 5 of them just talking. How's your golf game? What are you doing? What's this charity? I mean, they just sat there and jammed for like 3 or 4 minutes. And I said, you know, I told my mother and she said, are you making this up? I said, no, I swear. I couldn't believe it, you know.
You know what's such a great tie-in, Jim, is that where did they pick to hang out and have their cool hang? By the trumpets.
Yeah, exactly.
They came to the band.
Yeah, well, you know, they grew up in that era with swing bands, and they were always backstage with the band playing before they went out and did their thing. You know?
Right.
And in Vegas, they used to hang out at that Golden Corral. Have you ever been to that restaurant up in Vegas? Yeah, right next to, now it's the Stratosphere, but it used to be I think it was bigger originally, but that's where they would go after the 1 o'clock in the morning show. That they would hang out there a lot, or on Sunday night, usually after the things.
Right. Well, now
it's still there. I was surprised it's still there. Yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, I've been during this whole COVID thing, I've been driving from LA to Denver, and I have, you know, associations in both places. They're kind of my main 2 places here in the US. And dude, it is really weird to come over that hill, you know, coming south on the 15 at like 4:30 in the morning. I did this in March, looking down at Vegas and just seeing hardly any lights.
Yeah, I know.
Like
it's been a tough pandemic up there, real tough.
I mean, and then coming back the other direction, I even shot a couple of videos and put them on my Facebook, and I'm just going, there ain't nothing going on here. No. And then the last thing I heard about was one of the main, this was just a couple of days ago, my uncle, who has a friend who's retired, who lives out there and played for years, said that there's a chance that 10 of the biggest casinos could all just go out in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, they could just close them down.
Yeah, just like gone.
Yeah.
You know,
well, they're hemorrhaging money as you and I know many businesses are, and so and you know what, it's not anything that is their fault, But even if tomorrow we had a vaccine and we could all get vaccinated in 2 or 3 months, Vegas is not going to come back that fast because people are very nervous about this virus, and it's understandable. I mean, you're very careful. I'm very careful. My wife and I, we don't go anywhere without masks all the time.
Right.
And we pretty much tend to avoid crowds. I had a producer, Bobby Chavez, came in from San Antonio that I've done 4 or 5 records for, and so we went to La Paloma, but they're outside. They're serving outside. Everything is the al fresco dining, and so we still kept our masks on right up until the minute they served the food, and then right back on afterwards, because it's right. I've had 3 friends die from this that were in their 70s, and it's not a good thing. It's an ugly thing. And then what I just was so bummed about is it was already bad enough in the world. Like before the virus hit, it was already this like converging two anti-forces all getting up in each other's face. Right. I particularly have noticed it on Facebook in the last couple of years because I do marketing on Facebook. Sure. So, but then it was just like, oh, let's just add, this. Pour gasoline on a deadly fire. Yeah. Yeah, and then let's add more fires. Then let's add protesting. Then let's add looting. Yeah. And then, I mean, it's just a crazy time to be alive. So what I've been trying to get people to do is to just find some sense of humor somehow in this stuff, and to just keep smiling through it, and finding something that will make you laugh and keep you going. And for me, it's always been music, because I was always good at music. I didn't really have to work at music. Yeah. And man, I had to work at other stuff like algebra. Dude, I couldn't do algebra and history. The only D I ever got in high school was American history. Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it was just like, I just don't care about a bunch of dead guys. I want to play like Oscar Peterson. Where do I get that class? And there was no Oscar Peterson class. I mean, before Gene Aiken went to Greeley, I was at Greeley. Yeah, right. I remember that. And that was a terrible program, even though Buddy Baker, another trombone player. Right. Very good guy. Great guy. Very good guy. And, about all they knew to do in those days, Jim, for piano players, is they had like, the school owned a 3 LP set of Lenny Tristano playing solo piano. So they're like, well, you can check out the first LP. That'll get you through. That's right. Yeah. And see if you can memorize it and figure out all the notes to play by ear, and then you'll. Right. We don't have any music for it, but next quarter you can get the second album. Oh, I know. It was like that, but I mean, with all these professional things that you've done, I know you've got a really auspicious educational track record too, because I saw in the last couple of years that you did this, what I think is really innovative curriculum. You're ahead of the curve with the online class thing. And when I was teaching college, the first thing that I noticed in this hostile environment of all these different, mentalities and things going on, the first thing I did, even though I was adjunct, is I raised my hand and I said, I've been teaching on Skype for 7 years online. So can we get all the piano online? Right. And you can license my curriculum. I've written all the books. Sure. Everything. Absolutely. I can train the other teachers. And nope. Sorry. Okay. Right. It wasn't even a discussion. Like, I couldn't go into committee. I couldn't, Right. Well, they were all terrified of it. And first of all, so many people that are trained in music are trained from the classical perspective, which is great. That's a tremendous way to learn, and it is the foundation of all music. And then jazz is the other element of that, commercial and that. But you have to be able to play your major scales. You have to be able to do all those the technical things on your instrument. Well, yeah. And there are methodologies that work. And it sure helps when somebody says, no, don't play it that way, play it this way. Well, right. You can do that on Skype. It's not like sitting with you for 2 hours having a personal lesson in person. It's not as inspiring, but you can get basics across at those early levels, for the first or second year of a program, certainly at a junior college or an advanced high school. Right. You can make that work beautifully, and you can teach 10 people and they will learn from each other and they'll play for each other. And that's a very doable thing. And it had been for a long time.
Right.
And so my deal was, when I gave up the jazz program at Fullerton in '97, Terry Blackley was the dean.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to Terry and I said, this is the 25th year. I've been teaching big bands at the college level for 25 years.
Wow.
And I think I've done about as much as I can do. And our mutual friend was my assistant for 8 years, was Greg Wall.
Uh-huh.
Well, I was 45 years old. And if I taught for another 10 years, Greg would never be director of the jazz bands at the college, right? And he went there, go to school.
Oh, yeah.
He was with Terry and Terry's jazz band. And I thought, Greg is very competent. He'll change the program slightly because he liked a little more modern stuff. And I would say meat and potatoes because I felt their freshman and sophomore years, they needed to really understand what the basic elements. We did a lot of contemporary music, but they first had to play bassy well, and they had to do the basics first.
Right.
And Greg did that with the second band, but I knew he would change it slightly. I didn't care. I thought it was great. He's a wonderful guy. He's a great teacher. And, we don't all just eat bologna sandwiches every day, right? There's a big palette of information, a big stylistic and different opinions and different likes and dislikes. And I think that the more a student can be exposed to that, it's like when you have 4 great pianists on a faculty, you should study with each one of them for 1 year. You'll be a much better player.
Right.
And to just play with one guy and go, well, he's the only guy that knows anything. Well, that's, I don't think that's a smart way for education to work. Sure. But unfortunately, we become very territorial in education, and especially at the college level. And it's like, they have their bailiwick. Don't bother me. I don't care what you think. I'm going to do what I do, and I'm going to go home. Leave me alone. And so what I did with Terry, I cut a deal and I said, look, I want Greg to have the band, and I'm going to step out of the jazz program completely. I'm going to just step away from it. And we had Tom Hines, we had Ernie Delfonte, we had Greg Wall, we had Joe Jewell. Actually, at that time, it was Tom Hines on guitar. We had Bobby Dominguez Matt Johnson was teaching drum. We had a great staff of real jazz players.
Those are all top.
Just top-notch people. And I said, Terry, I've kind of done everything I can do, and everybody knows what to expect. So I said, let me step away, because I wanted to go back into the real industry on a production side. I had some production opportunities, and I thought, I think I've done enough of this. I think it was just, and of all the things I've done wrong in my lifetime with my career, that was the one smart thing that I did, because I went to him and he was very cool, and he said, I can understand that. And I said, can I get a schedule that is a 4-day-a-week schedule? And I'm happy to come at very early in the morning at 7 o'clock, teach those early morning classes that nobody wants with 120 kids, or 160 in those days. And if I can teach from 7 to 10 or 7 to 11, he said, well, if you teach doubles, you can be out of here at 10 o'clock. I said, great, because then I can be in Hollywood by 10:30, 10:45. So I could do an 11 o'clock, at Warner Brothers or wherever, and still, and so he said yes, and it worked out fantastically. It was wonderful. And that's when I started looking at online teaching, because I thought, a lot of these lectures, if I could just have the kids, because they don't, you and I both know, kids don't always show up for class. I know that's a revelation to many people, but you have 160 people in the class, and there'll be 158 there when they take the test. But the rest of the time, it'll vary anywhere from 80 to maybe 90 or 100 if you're lucky, if you're entertaining, right? I call it the entertainment factor, right? And that I took the recital hall that we were teaching the 160 kids in, and I put in the same Panasonic high resolution film projectors that we had at Warner Brothers. I had them put in a brand new ADT or ADK speaker system with big woofers, and man, you could crank that baby, and it was crystal clear on this big 20-foot screen. So when we watched history of rock videos, or if we watched the London Symphony in classical music, or if we watched Miles Davis in a performance from the 50s, it was really awesome to watch.
Yeah.
And so the classes were all filled. They were totally full. But I slowly evolved into that online process, because it's like, if they could just see my lecture online and access the material by going to a website, as it evolved in the in the 90s and through the first part of the 21st century, they wouldn't get behind. It would help them. And I never understood teachers who was like, I'm going to be able to flunk half of them because they didn't do the work and they don't deserve to pass. Well, what does that prove? That doesn't do anything for people. Kids, if you fail because you don't do anything, okay, then that's the consequence of you learn by failure. We all learn by failure.
Right.
But if you're a typical kid, an 18, 19, sometimes 20-year-old going on 14, that, kind of waits till the last minute, it's like, I wonder if I could do the whole class in 3 weeks, the other 12 weeks don't count, right? I wonder if I could do that. So I built in those kinds of escape, ramps so that they could, and so if I got them hooked in history of rock, well, then they'd take history of jazz. And by then they'd actually start to become pretty good students. Then they would take the classical music classes. So I self-populated all those classes. And by the time I quit, I was almost totally online. I was teaching, in fact, I'm still teaching 1 or 2 classes a semester, part-time online, I told John, I said, give me a class so I don't get completely out of it. And I said, just keep my finger in it a little bit. And he said, sure. And so John Tabay, so he was nice and let me do that, which is very nice. But yeah, online learning, as we now know, I think the good thing out of this pandemic, maybe the only good thing out of it, other than the fact that many people actually, I've heard so many guys say, I get up in the morning and I walk 3 miles and I eat my breakfast and then I go write music or I practice for 5 hours because I have the time to do this. Right. And, I've had several guys humorously say, I never really realized how much I really do like my wife. It's really remarkable because we're actually together a lot, which I think is really cool. And I and Zeke are having a wonderful time. We're just having a ball. Wow. So the online learning, I think, is going to be drastically changed. I've got a young man, they got a little 12-year-old trumpet player, apparently this nice little prodigy, this gifted kid. And so he was referred to me by several people. And so I'm going to give him a couple of Zoom lessons and give him some basic material and, just kind of get him a little something to oomph him up there. And then I've got some videos that I can share with him so he could study. But his dad called me up and he says, he listens to Miles Davis and Clifford Brown 7 hours a day. Those are the people that he adores. And so I said, good. Then he's got an interest,
Well, there's
so on the Zoom platform, we could, like you and I are talking right now. Right. I mean, it'd be more fun if you were here in the studio with me, but hey, it works. And so,
well, I remember coming to visit you a few years ago, and we were working on some project, and you were like, "Okay, Mullins, let's go out. And we're gonna go hang out at my favorite little place." And I remember it was all like, it had these high patio chairs, and it was white with these umbrellas.
Right.
And you don't have to say the name of the place. And it was like, we're sitting outside and stuff. And I think you and I were the creators of the original social distancing.
Yeah.
Because, I was 6 feet apart from you. I wouldn't, I didn't think it was any big deal. And you didn't either. And that night was one of the most fun nights I've had out in that part of California, where you're at and stuff. It was just a ball hanging out and hearing these stories. And now, after reading your bio, I'm kind of getting refreshed on some of this other stuff too, because I just had no idea. I mean, I looked at this thing here and I went, okay, how do you get the gig as U.S. State Department, United States Cultural Ambassador to Middle East and Africa as a trumpet player? So how do you, because in those days, you couldn't really just go online and say, oh, I think I just want to be like a Middle Eastern.
No.
I mean, was this another situation where you just met somebody and it fell together?
Yeah, and interestingly, because you've been in the studio here, which is attached to my home. It's a big studio attached to a home.
Right.
And the man that originally owned the home was one of the most astute classical pianists. And he and Guy Mayer in the 40s, and he graduated from Oberlin back in the late 20s, and then taught at the University of Washington, and eventually became the piano teacher here at the Claremont Colleges, at Pomona College in the music department. And then he and Halsey Stevens were good drinking buddies. And so Halsey was supposed to write the liner notes for the LA Philharmonic. And he called up Daryl and he goes, Daryl, I hate doing this. And Daryl said, well, I'll write a couple of them for you and take the pressure off. Well, Daryl wrote all the liner notes for 20 years for the LA Philharmonic. And he hung out with all the conductors and all the dudes and all the musicians. And he was an excellent pianist. And then he got a Fulbright in 1952.
That's a scholarship for people who
Yeah.
don't know what that is.
Right, and a Fulbright. And so what they do is they
Fitzgerald.
give you they give you a big chunk of money, and they gave him a Fulbright, but it was tied to teaching at the Conservatory of Athens in Greece
Wow.
in their department. So he was going to teach piano there, and then he was going to do concerts and lectures on contemporary music. His best friend was George Crumb, Elliott Carter. It just goes down the line. Every San Diego, the Bells and all that. I can't. Harry Patch.
Oh, Harry Parch.
And every contemporary composer in the United States and pretty much across the world knew Darrell as a champion of new music.
Okay.
So the Fulbright people said, "You're our guy." Of course, we were right in the Cold War. We were in the McCarthy era, and he was, American composers were free to do anything, as opposed to the Soviets, where you had to sound like, Tchaikovsky, or you couldn't get a gig, right?
Right.
And so he went to the conservatory. They flew him and said, Jim, in those days, it was a 28-hour airplane flight from Los Angeles to get to Athens.
Uh-huh.
And he said, you just get off one and you get on another, and you hopscotch to Iceland, and you hopscotch to Ireland, and you hopscotch, and you get hopscotching, right?
Right.
And
crazy.
so after 28 hours, he gets down to the Athens airport, and it's about 6:30 at night, and he comes off the plane, and he said, I stink, I'm exhausted. And at the bottom, there's an embassy car with 2 flags flying. And he's going, wow, how nice of them to send an embassy official welcome, right? And there's a man down at the bottom, and he said, are you Mr. Dayton? And because they had the sign, are you Mr. Dayton? He says, yes, I am. He says, good, sir, if you get in the car. He got him in the car, and they start driving, and he said, Mr. Dayton, we're taking you to the embassy. And we've called, we called the States, and we got your tuxedo size, and we have a tuxedo for you. And we have a place for you to shower quickly. And we have all of the ambassadors, American ambassadors to Europe in Athens, and they are in the ambassador's house tonight. And the man who was supposed to give the concert has fallen very ill.
Oh,
and
no.
we were wondering if you wouldn't be willing to play a small recital. Well, he had just finished.
Yeah.
He had just finished his recital here in Pomona the week before. He'd memorized it, right?
Oh, no
And
pressure.
he said, Jim, I was so exhausted. I went in, I took a shower quick. The tuxedo fit perfectly. They gave me a half of a turkey sandwich. And he said, I walked out, and they introduced him, read his bio. And he said, I walked out and had a nice 9-foot Steinway, tuned. And he said, there were 300 people in this room, all in tux, full, the opera dress, the whole 9 yards. There's a formal ambassadorial party. And so there were like 30 American ambassadors there. And he said, I sat down at the piano and I thought, I'm just going to do what I did on the recital. And he opened with Bach because that's what he had played. And he said, I played that Bach piece 1,000 times. And he said, I never played it better than that. I played it. That was the best I could have ever played it. And he said, they just went crazy. And he said, so then I played like a Chopin little Polonaise thing. And he said, I could do no wrong. He said, I was so tired that it was just like, wow, look at my fingers. They're doing really well tonight. I'm going, Darrell, oh my God. So he was a star, right? So the next day, he's going to meet the ambassador officially for lunch.
Right.
And they're going to thank him and give him a little award and all that kind of stuff. They came to his hotel room at 9 o'clock in the morning, woke him out of a deep, deep sleep. And 5 men sat down and said, we are going to temporarily postpone your Fulbright, and we would like you to go to work for us as a cultural ambassador for the United States. And what it really was the Central Intelligence Agency.
Wow.
So he started giving concerts behind all of the Iron Curtains. He was behind the Iron Curtain 93 times.
Wow.
In 8 years. And this is through the late 50s and the early 60s. Think about that. I mean,
wow, that's a lot of that's a lot of curtains.
Yeah, and he was like, I think he was in 112 countries, if I remember right. I have all this stuff logged in one place, but I mean, if he'd had a database, there'd have been 10,000 people around the world that were his friends that knew him very well.
Huh.
And so when he finished 10 years, because he eventually became the section chief for the Central Intelligence Agency, operated out of Athens.
Wow.
So when he came back to the United States, it was, let's see, it would have been Johnson. I think it was Johnson. It wasn't Nixon. It was before Nixon, so it would have been Johnson. invited him to take over as director of the United States Information Agency, which the CBS anchor that confronted McCarthy, who am I trying to say? Edward R. Murrow.
Edward R. Murrow. I remember that.
Edward R. Murrow, who remember, Edward had been a war correspondent, and everybody trusted him because he told them the truth. He didn't lie to them.
Right. No, he was a big time trusted.
And he finally confronted McCarthy and used his own words to say, folks, we're a little over the edge here on this. So Edward R. Murrow was retired by CBS, and he ran the USIA, but he had lung cancer. And so the Johnson administration came and said, you would be the perfect guy to take over this agency. And so he took it over, and the first thing he did was they had already sent Louis Armstrong and several jazz artists abroad, and then they stopped it completely. So he said that was the dumbest thing we could have done. So he sent Ella Fitzgerald to Tokyo and to Japan,
right,
in 1964, 65, whatever it was. And then Elvin Jones to Japan, because Elvin was married to a Japanese, and it just went on like that.
Wow.
And all of these guys. And so it was Daryl. This was his house, and that's Steinway that you played on.
Right.
You played that Steinway. That was Arthur Schnabel's Steinway. It was built for Schnabel.
Wow.
And it was done in 1937, I think, 37 or 38. And they were going to send it to Schnabel in Berlin, but he said, don't do it because the Nazis have taken over, and I don't know what's going to happen. So he said, send it out to my student who had studied with Schnabel in 1933 in Berlin. So he came here to his front living room. And so that was the whole story behind that. So
holy smokes.
Yeah. So the history in this house is just remarkable. And I had a picture of, I got to find these things. I get so disorganized sometimes, but there was a picture of Guy Mayer and Daryl and Arthur Rubinstein, Vladimir Horowitz, and who's the other Chopin, the other
Van Cliburn.
Yeah, well, it wasn't Clyburn, but it was one of the other. In other words, there's 5 superstar, and they're all sitting in the living room playing music for each other. Hey, I got one for you, like a jazz player would do, right? But I really love. So what I guess brought all this about, you ask, how do you get a job? Daryl just came to me and he said, you should be out with your expertise. You should be out playing and concertizing for the government. He said, I'm going to make a call for you. And 2 days later, they called and said, we're going to send you to Africa. And I called Tom Hines and I said, we need to put a duo together because they're only going to give me 2 people. Okay. And I didn't, the piano would be impossible to take,
right.
Because in Africa, where would you get a piano in some of these? Because we were out in the Congo.
Wow.
So we actually carried a little power generator and a little portable PA system that I had set up here in the States and had Anvil built cases for them. And so we were self-contained, and we played the Azam Palace in Damascus. We played and when they did the concert that night at the Azam Palace, it only held about 1,800 people. They had 25,000 people show up.
Holy smokes.
They put it on the news. So they set up those, remember those big jumbotrons now that we take for granted on these football field things? They put those up. In Damascus, in Syria, there were 3 TV networks, and they were all controlled by the government, but they competed with each other just like fierce, right? And so it was like that everywhere we went. There was like some crazy thing going on. But Daryl got me into that. It was really fun. I did several of them, and I really enjoyed the work. Africa was fascinating for me. And I was in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa, and this was 96, I think, or 97, whichever year it was. And they were trying to make the transition from analog to digital.
Oh, wow.
Right. And I had done all that already here in the States in the studios, and, worked with all the I forget what we had. Tascam, I think, was the hot thing at that time. Remember the little?
Yeah, Tascam.
Yeah, the Tascams, which were great. And so anyway, when I got to Ethiopia, we played a concert at the Haile Selassie Palace. And the next day, the ambassador said, could you come in early? And we'd like to talk to you. And so I came in and he goes, Jim, here's what we got. We have about $100,000 worth of new equipment in our television broadcasting station, but we don't know how to make it work. And they're afraid to take the system down without having it ready to go. And he said, would you be willing to help these engineers put this together? So I went out and worked for 4 days on their TV system, and we tested. We got it all ready to go. And then on Friday, they looked at me and I go, well, I said, you got to bite the bullet one of these times, guys. I said, we might be down for a couple hours, but I don't think we'll go down for longer than that, you know. And I said, get everything powered up. And I said, all right, just hit the damn switch and hit the switcher. And boom. And you know what? The TV went from grainy to just crystal clear. And it was like, and they just went like, oh, wow. You know how digital looked as opposed to the analog TV. Oh, and they were 1940s analog TV, and all of a sudden,
wow.
It was 1996 digital. And it was like, dude. And we had to have an analog co-signal for those people that, but even the analog signal improved so immensely for like a standard television set. It was just like night and day. So that was a fun memory. That was.
Golly, well, yeah, I mean,
that's how I knew when I went in Bank of America and I saw my beautiful wife, Zanash. I went, she's from Ethiopia, because Ethiopian women are very beautiful and they have a very unique look among all African cultures. They're very fine featured and there's a very unique look. And that's when I looked at her and I thought, that girl is from Ethiopia, because I'd been there. So it was all God's plan, you know.
Wow, man. Yeah, I remember being at your place and her kind of gliding in with this like little plate of snacks, and you're just
going, right. She brings in those Ethiopian snacks, and
she brings the snacks in, but you're looking at her and just going, "It's a goddess."
Yeah.
Yeah.
When Luther Hughes had a band that recorded her for many, many times, and Paul Krybick and Glenn Cashman, all those guys, and she loved Luther and she loved Paul. So anytime they were here, man, here came the hors d'oeuvres. I never said a word. I never asked for any of it. So the fact that you got hors d'oeuvres meant she must have liked you quite a bit, because, you know, she would just suddenly show up and say, here, guys, have some of these little Ethiopian delicacies. And they're, oh, man, you know.
So, yeah, that's crazy. Well, you know, circling back around to the technology and the future, because as we were saying in the pre-show, both of us have been doing this a long time. Do you think that now, because we've got this immense amount of resources, technical and otherwise, you know, because you and I probably both remember the first Tandy typewriter with a hard drive, and it held 150K
right
on it. And now,
remember when 20 megabytes were like, oh my God, that's humongous. You know, this one's going to have 40 megabytes and it costs $5,000.
And it's bigger than your house.
Yes, exactly.
Like, I
could
just
put the computer in this room, but we'd have to take out all the booth.
We're going to get some new memory, but we don't have room for a piano, a console.
Yeah, exactly. We're taking over the women's restroom. It's gone now.
But, you know, I've been teaching a lot and working in the digital realm for quite a while, just as you have. And it's crazy because now kids will come in when I'm first meeting them and they'll say, oh, yeah, you're in the Grammys, you know, Grammy Schmammies.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, you're a recording artist? And they go, yeah. And I go, okay. Because usually if you can talk gear, you know, a little technical, then you can kind of get on the good side.
Sure.
And I said, all right, well, you know, what kind of gear are you using? And then they'll just like reach into their pocket and they'll go, you know,
my cell phone. Yeah.
My phone.
Yeah. GarageBand.
It doesn't show up that great on it. There we go.
Yeah. Right.
But Jim, some of these kids, they're doing like 8 tracks of background vocals.
Sure. Yeah. They're very creative. You know, kids are creative. They're going to find a way. And I mean, you know, look at the stuff we did with a cassette recorder, you know, and you record and you go like, oh, can't hear the bass, move the bass in closer to the microphone to these 2 mics, you know, and the trumpet's way too loud. You go stand 20 feet, like the original recording, like Louis Armstrong's 40 feet away and the singer's right into the megaphone, right?
Right. Well,
you know, so you know, that's part of the fun of being a kid, you know.
Sure. Well, some of these students that have come into my program, then I've got to try and see if I can get them to engage in the history, because it's not fast enough for them, because they're like, you mean it used to take you all day to just
practice? You mean I have to play all these scales and all these keys?
Right.
Well, you don't have to unless you want to be a musician, because at some point you're going to run up against a guy that can do that.
Right.
And he's going to leave you in the dust, and then you're going to go, why didn't I do this earlier? Because then you have to go back and rebuild your repertoire again. So
it's funny.
It's that salesmanship, right?
Right.
Well, why don't you do this just for fun, and then we'll do this, and let's play giant steps at D flat, huh?
Right, exactly. I have this thing that I call the Berkeley Smash, which is when students that are in my program, and this happened with just 2 or 3 over the years, but I remember this one trumpet player in particular came to me, and his mom was a fan of my writing and this and that, and she said, "Oh, he needs a jazz improv teacher because he's going to audition for Berkeley and everything." Okay, great. So I got my own improvisational curriculum. We get going,
Sure.
happening, and then I find out this is like the laziest, most egotistical kid ever born in Beverly Hills.
Of course.
And he expects the trumpet.
I've never met any of them like that. Yeah.
No, never. And none of them have uncles in the business.
No, yeah. Well, we're back to that nepotism thing again.
That's what Jeff listening is. So the kid is coming in, and he's getting more and more interested in the 4-string electric bass because he's made an African-American bass player friend at school.
Oh, okay.
So now the practicing on my stuff is just going
right down the tube, yeah.
But he's got to go out to Berkeley and do those combo auditions.
You bet.
And the mom keeps saying, "Well, isn't it wonderful that he's just branched out into studying bass and he's understanding more ethnicities? And I just think he's just going to do so well." And I'm going, wow, how do I break it to her that the kid walks in to the piano class and just goes, blankety, blankety, blank Mullins,
right. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, just to wrap up the story real quick. So anyway, the kid goes out there, he goes to Berkeley, and this is a mama's boy. They're really tight.
Sure.
He gets into the combo auditions, and you know how they post all the names on every
audition.
What do you make first, combo, second?
Right. Combo,
Dude,
third, right.
No, he wasn't on any list.
Any list, right? He's in the y'all come cattle call class.
It's like, y'all come back next year. You hear?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Can I get this call? And I shouldn't laugh about it because I mean, they're nice people.
Yeah, of course.
But he, she called me and she was in tears, and she said, "I just got off the phone to my son and he's in tears and I'm in tears." And and see, they would try and blame it on me somehow.
Yeah, well, it's always easy to say, well, it's all the teacher's fault. But as you and I both know, teaching is simply about exposing people to knowledge. And then once you expose them to it, you can say, now, look, you're supposed to read this and study it, and then we're going to test you over it.
Right.
And if you don't do well in the test, well, then you can prepare better for the next test. And
Sure.
All my online learning now, I kind of figured out that, there's always going to be 30, 40% that won't really read very much of the material. So I let them take the test 3 times, and they end up reading the material a lot more because they can't pass the test.
Oh.
So okay, if you don't want to read the thing, take the test cold, see how you do, and you get 3 tries and you got 100 points in the test and you scored 12 in the first test. You better man, that book comes out. They start reading this. I don't know. And then the next one, they'll score 45.
Right.
And then it's like, oh God, now I really got to get serious. And then the last one, they'll all score 80 to 90, where they should have, which they could have done the first time. And I just thought about it. And I thought, you know what? They still spend 12 hours reading that book because they're afraid to take that 3rd test because I'll flunk this class. And if I flunk this class, then I got to do, A, B, C, or D. And so I kind of looked at it that way. And it's like, look, if that's how people learn, if that's how they want to learn, we're old school. And plus I enjoy reading books. So I would just read the book.
Yeah, I didn't have a problem with that either.
Yeah, it's easy, but so I don't know what it is. But yeah, it's always like, well, my child failed because of you. No, your child failed because of him or her. That's what it was. All I did was present the information and put the standards down and say, hey, here's the material we've covered. Tell me about it. What have you learned?
Right.
And it's like, well, I didn't learn anything, and it's all your fault. Well, did you read the book? No. How many times were you in class? I was there twice out of 16. It's like,
and then what I really like too is when the parent calls and says, "Did you see the size of our donation last year to the school?"
I know. Dude, that's why
We've
I
given the school
I tried to
three.
stay away from private education because I thought, oh no, because it's like, well, this person hasn't done anything. They're getting an A. Well, you realize
Right.
you're enabling this behavior, and this person
Wow.
will end up being a complete disaster in life. And it's like, they won't be our disaster; they'll be gone. It's somebody else's problem, you know.
So that's
So
you know, I hate myself for the
yeah,
thoughts I have of Lori Loughlin in prison right now. Because, you know, being a guy that's had a crush on her for 30 years, I have these terrible thoughts like, well, what does
oh
she look
yeah,
like in the outfit? I mean, what prison is it? Could I go get a
yeah,
tape?
yeah. No,
Maybe I can help her
yeah,
escape. I just love Lori Loughlin.
yeah.
But it,
Oh dear, yeah.
it all kind of comes full circle. But I just want to thank you for coming on and sharing a lot of these great stories and your incredible accomplished life as a studio guy, because anybody that I work with, it's usually we're all on the go. Like, you know, when
Right.
I've been at your place, it's like, okay, we're getting all these parts done in these 3 hours.
We got a lot to get done. Sure.
And somebody's got to come in and you got to like change and tune and reset
Yep.
up the music stands. So to just, you know, be able to just kind of hang,
Yeah,
sit
it's nice.
back.
Well, you know, it used to be we would run buses such a large percentage of the time. We'd have time to talk and hang out and enjoy it. But that's not the world that we live in anymore, you know. And of course, this pandemic has really, really made it where you don't see people because we're not playing at the Hollywood Bowl, or we're not working with the Long Beach Symphony, or we're not, you know, we're not
Right.
playing in Vegas or in Palm Springs. You know, it's just it's quiet right now. So,
Right.
and you know, but it will come back. It'll come back. And the arts, I mean, can you imagine really, would you want to do anything else for a living all the time? I can't.
No.
I don't think I could. I mean, I love my brothers, and they're all tremendously successful and wonderful businessmen in various fields, very, very successful.
Mhm.
And great workers, and they treat their employees and the people they work with beautifully. They're great souls. But I just looked at it and I thought, would I want to get up and do that every day? And it's like, I get to get up every day and I'm excited about what I'm going to do musically. I
Right.
just did a brand new big band album for Jeff Benedict of Paul McKee, you know, Paul, the trombone player in Denver, great player. All these wonderful musicians that were on this band, they came in from all over the country. And we recorded it, and I worked on that for I just finished it. I just finished it yesterday, about 3 weeks. And man, what a joy it is to work on that. Oh, it was just, I mean, every day I got up and I come in, my wife come in and go, you've been in here for 9 hours. You haven't even gotten up and gone to the bathroom. How can you not go to the bathroom? And I go, what time is it? She goes, it's 7 o'clock. And she said, you started at like 7:30 or 8 o'clock. And I'm going like, wow, time flies. It just disappears, you know.
Yeah.
You sit down and start writing music, all of a sudden 6 hours later, it's like, whoa, where did the time go?
Well,
Because
it's
I'm so immersed in that wonderful sound.
well, the great thing that I've noticed, you know, and just seeing and you know, reading the bio and listening to some of the stuff that you're doing, like you're at a really high performance level with the quality of your work too, which is because once you get it to where you're like, well, heck, I got a Golden Globe and I got a couple Grammys and I got a couple this and I've been to Africa and that, and you know, I survived having the CIA piano player.
God bless
You
Daryl.
know,
What
so
a wonderful man he was.
you get to where you really do appreciate, because I'm, you know, working in the box a lot now because of the COVID thing. And I've got a wonderful album that I did live that I should send you. I had the party set and great. It was a Denver band, great guys. And I just had to, you know, my entire year was wiped out, including the party for that. Great trumpet player on that too, that plays trumpet and flugel. Cool. And I don't have trumpet and flugel on any of my other stuff, but just even working in the box with a computer and knowing I have all these elements, I'm just like a chef.
Yeah, you are. Sure.
I keep getting these things and I put them together.
Yeah.
And then I put it on speakers.
You're a painter of sound is what you are. When we finally get it all put together and get it where we want it, then you get to paint that sound. And then when you get it all perfected, and then when you put it into mastering, and it becomes this huge sound. And then you send it to your clients and they will call you up and they go like, I don't know what you did, but I'm just we got 20 guys here, we're listening to it for the 5th time, and everybody's just had, they just love it. And it makes you feel really good because you got into music for one thing, it touched your soul. That's what
right. Exactly.
That's what we are. We really are, it's the music is the language of the soul. That's what we really do. And that's why musicians, for the most part, are really fun to hang out with, and they're usually very caring people and they're givers. And so, we're blessed. We're very lucky.
And a lot of really bad jokes.
Yeah. The stories alone are priceless.
I mean, the stories. That's so. Jim, thanks again for coming on, and I can't wait to get back to that little bar with the white things, and we'll.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do that. And send me your piano album. I'd love to hear it. That would be great.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, okay. do shoot me one. I would love to listen to it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And thanks, Rob, for having me on. It's been fun to talk to you. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, you too. Okay. Well,
all right.
Have a great rest of your weekend, and we're signing off for now. So take care.
All right, bro.